Queg traveled at arm's length, leading the way. After countless twists, turns, ups and downs, Aaron finally gave up on memorizing their path. There's no point anyway, I was lost to begin with. Let's just trust the friendly Lovecraftian monstrosity. He looked over at Queg as they went up the umpteenth slope. The guy seemed to know exactly where they were going. Not once had he stopped to consider the next turn. Was Queg a he, even? So, Aaron said, what exactly are you? Queg gave a start and slowed down for a moment. Finding the one particular path they were supposed to follow seemed to take up a large chunk of his concentration. A fair thing to ask, he said in lights and hums. You would answer such a question with a human being, yes? The pause was just long enough for Aaron to interject a non-committal grunt. In my home realm, my species is called... Queg pronounced it as a deep, rather grandiose sound, accompanied by an equally impressive display of colors. It didn't translate as a specific word in Aaron's mind, but as a conglomerate of concepts instead. Pathway Seeker, Servant of the Gods, 14th Generation. He let it linger for a little while, then continued. We are mostly known as scouts and navigators among the sapiens, and we will carry information swiftly and reliably across great distances. Some of us actually broker this information, but it is too risky an enterprise in my opinion. I belong to the Mapping Guild, as a matter of fact. Humans will usually refer to my kind as Remoran, after the name they have given my home realm, Remora. I have also been called Squid, Floater, Strobe, Bleeper, and similar descriptive terms like Tentacled Abomination. Dealing with your kind is challenging. No offense intended, of course. It depends on faction and region, mostly. Other sapiens, such as the Fermi, are far more diplomatic toward us in general. They rely on denizens for long-range navigation, you understand? On the other extreme, the Petrichor will kill us on a proximity basis. My people remind them of a hated, monstrous species from beyond, unfortunately. Questions kept popping up in Aaron's head after Queg's every other word, so many that he could hardly keep track of them. He settled on the one thing that had been nagging at him the whole time. How come I understand everything you say? I mean, I can't even tell which words are capitalized. Somehow I don't think you're actually speaking English right now. English. Queg mulled over the word for a few seconds, as if trying to figure out what it was supposed to stand for. Ah, yes, language. Another common question, I understand. I have been fortunate enough to be in good standing with a few human contacts, and one such was gracious enough to explain... Queg paused abruptly. The trail had taken them under a sinuous tunnel that had gradually narrowed to nearly all of Queg's considerable girth. Aaron had been so engrossed in the conversation that he had barely noticed they'd gone underground. The passage became so short that he had to bend down slightly in order to avoid hitting his head. Queg floated low enough to be almost crawling on his appendages. After a few claustrophobic bends, the tunnel gradually expanded towards an opening big enough to fit a small airliner. Queg continued as if there had been no interruption, unfazed by the capricious nature of their path. The mechanics of it are unknown to me, but you are understanding me because you wish to do so, and I can understand you because you want me to. Aaron stopped walking. What? I suppose it is a difficult concept. It is unique to sapiens, obviously. Obviously. I presume your human peers will explain in more detail in due time. You could test it if you wish. Say something that you do not want me to understand. Aaron caught up to the alien, still wondering whether to take the explanation seriously. He would have been more willing to believe that a babblefish had been surreptitiously implanted in his ear. Then again, Queg hadn't made any attempts at humor so far, and Aaron doubted that the creature had suddenly decided to start playing pranks. It didn't take him long to find something suitable to say. I am scared shitless. Queg's laughter made him reconsider. Maybe it was a prank after all. He still found it unnerving, the way he could tell that the alien was indeed laughing. You understood that, didn't you? Why, yes, and I cannot say I blame you. You misunderstood me, I think, or perhaps I misspoke. You must make a conscious effort for me not to understand what you are saying. It's not enough to confess an embarrassing detail that you wouldn't want me to know. Do try again. Ah, well, all right then. Aaron tried to do as he was told and fixed in his head the notion of not being understood. I do not want you to understand this sentence, he said, and raised a hopeful eyebrow at Queg. The alien was already shaking his head, which is to say, uttering a quavering rumble while 3 of his light nodes lit up in different shades of blue. I'm afraid I understood that as well. Well, it's not easy. When I talk to somebody in my own language, it's because I want to be understood. It's like going against instinct. He'd actually felt it, somehow, the tug between the inertia of subconscious instinct and his will trying to go against it. It was as if he'd become more aware of the inner workings of his psyche. Quag nodded, thoughtful. You are a newborn. Although I can't claim previous experience in dealing with one such as you, I would not be surprised if it takes a certain amount of practice to learn all the abilities that a human would normally command. It would explain why the protocol urges that I escort you to safety as soon as possible. Newborns are known to be utterly defenseless when they first appear. To be described as utterly defenseless did nothing to improve Aaron's outlook. All right, he said. Just so we're clear now. You aren't dead, are you? That's just me, right? A low contrast shift let Aaron know that Queg nodded. You are a sapient, sir. You exist here after having lived, as do all sapients. I am a denizen, and very much alive. That's an answer, I guess. They had cleared the cave to continue down a wide path that sunk in a long downward spiral. Tall walls at both sides of the path prevented Aaron from seeing much else. He made a vague gesture at the scenery before them. So what is this place anyway? We are in the pathways, an ever-changing labyrinth that connects to most other realms. Its sheer size belies the amount of traffic it moves at any given time. You can go your entire trip sometimes without encountering any other travelers. Yet some routes are heavily traversed, while they last. Gorgers to Veal, for instance, or the way from the Spire to the Nexus. Of course, the answer would contain some 20 things to ask about. Aaron picked one almost at random. While they last? The ways are alive, after a fashion. They shift constantly, slowly or abruptly. Sometimes in front of you. Sometimes all around you, unfortunately. Aaron eyed the way ahead with renewed apprehension. Could everything cave in at any moment? He tried not to think about it and moved on to the next question. When you say realms, he said, does that mean, like, kingdoms? Other countries, or... Realms are... realms. Noticing Aaron's befuddled expression, the Remoran made a rueful gesture with some of his appendages. Forgive me, it is easy to forget that the things I take for granted are... Ah, there it is! Queg propelled himself toward what had caught his attention, veering closer to the left side of the path. With all the fluttering tentacles and the fleshy orb brightening beneath them, the bustling alien was a sight that Aaron continually struggled to get used to. He trotted to catch up to his guide and peered at the section of the wall with which Queg was interacting. Protruding out of the inner wall of the descending spiral was a tight cluster of glossy black stalks, just about the length of his arm and half as thick. They had flat tips at the end of flexible stems, and swayed lazily back and forth, side to side as if stroked by a gentle breeze that couldn't decide which way to blow. They made a faint sound as they swayed, brief bleeps and hums ranging from rumbling to high-pitched. They rang atop one another and combined in a subdued tune of unpredictable patterns, and Aaron had to strain to hear them at all. Queg leaned closer and wrapped one of his tentacles around the stalk with the sort of confidence that comes from extensive repetition. The previously supple stalk jolted straight to its full length, rigid under Queg's unconcerned touch. He didn't seem to be pulling on it. The thing had straightened all by itself. Aaron's face was a list of unspoken questions, and Queg must have noticed, because he made a polite, quieting gesture with 2 of his many free appendages. The Remoran went on to concentrate intently on the writhing mass of stalks in front of him. Nothing moved for a good while, and soon Aaron was unable to keep still. He shifted his weight from foot to foot for a moment, then walked over to the slanted wall and slowly leaned against it, half expecting to sink into this strange material even if he knew it to be as hard as granite. He looked at Queg from time to time through the corner of his eye. He felt awkward and out of place, burdened so with such overwhelming ignorance. Was it like this for every person that died back on Earth? Was everyone destined to stumble blindly through this place, hoping for some stranger to show up and lend a helping hand? A part of him wanted to deny what he was seeing, chalk it up to a hallucination, and patiently wait to get done dying already. It was hard not to feel humbled by the experience. The universe had decided to toss all the known laws out the window and throw him into some bizarre after-death adventure. It's either that or I'm in Sunnydale's mental asylum. He thought about it for a while. Half the people he knew would be going crazy in this situation. Shouldn't he have been reduced to gibbering madness as well? Would a normal person be moderately cool having a tentacle monster guide them through a labyrinth of flesh? Why wasn't he losing his sanity? He'd have loved to believe it was due to an open mind, steadfast wits, courage, and adaptability. It only took him a moment of consideration to know the truth of it. He was just glad to be alive. Or being, at the very least. He'd never been as aware to his will to exist as in those last moments when the truth of what he was about to lose became clear. Alexandra's charcoal eyes and everything he'd read in them were forever seared into his memory. He leaned his head back so that it rested against the cool surface of the wall. His eyes idly scanned the myriad bridges and platforms that crowded above him. He did not see a single soul wandering those paths. Aaron sighed. Alex had to be somewhere. If she'd been right all along, she would be in heaven, sipping wine while lounging on a cloud, or whatever heaven was like. He chuckled at the mental image of muscle-bound angels in tight shorts, cooling her with long feathery fans while waiting on her every command. His amusement didn't last long. Alexandra had dreaded the possibility of separation. She would be devastated. And I made fun of it like a dumbass. I'm in for one hell of a I told you so when I find her. Perhaps she would forget all about life on Earth upon entering heaven. Or maybe she was given a duplicate version of everything she loved. Possibly she would be held in drug-addled contentment for all eternity. Who could tell anymore? None of it sounded any more outlandish than his current situation. Most likely, however, she had simply shown up somewhere in this place, just as lost as he was. It was the logical assumption to make. Is it really? Or is it just what I'd like to believe? Aaron shook his head. It was the only thing he could believe. Hopefully she would get her very own guiding alien to take her to other humans. It stood to reason that his best chance for a reunion would be to comply with Queg and seek out his peers. Queg's weird voice brought him out of his reverie. The realm interface hasn't moved. It's rare that they do, but it's always best to make sure. He had released the stock and looked pleased. I guess I don't need to see the light patterns to understand him, Aaron mused as Queg floated closer. I didn't think the humming was complex enough to carry so many words, but there you have it. I do apologize for the wait, sir. It is necessary to attune with the terminal. You know, you can call me Aaron if you like. As you wish, sir. A small pause. Aaron. Well, you don't have to. Whichever you're comfortable with, I mean. I understand. Thank you, sir. No problem. Aaron hooked a thumb at the strange tendrils Queg had been consulting. I guess you were asking directions? After a fashion, yes. It will be a short trip, if you please. The guide gestured to continue their journey down the path. Aaron pushed himself away from the wall and obliged. He stared at the sway of the stalks as he strode past them. Their whimsical beeping noises were almost a melody, like the random toll of a dozen wind chimes. The tendrils run through the entirety of the pathways, Queg explained. Some say they are the pathways, but I beg to differ. You might glimpse them beneath the surface if you look carefully. The terminal I just used is one of many thousands. You can locate them if you listen closely to the ripples. Aaron internalized a sigh. Was he ever going to get an answer that didn't contain 10 new concepts to puzzle out? So you were actually talking to those things. to this place. Not quite talking. We tap into the pathway's extensive network and find what we are looking for much the same way you would find the tip of your 13th tentacle. You know it's there, you see. The communion with the tendril that runs your desired path lingers for a time, allowing for continued navigation. Wow. That's something, all right. It's the current theory, in any case. Aaron arched an eyebrow. Current theory? What do you mean, current theory? It was Queg's turn to sound puzzled. Well, it is the best explanation available. It could be proven wrong the way others have, and there are other plausible explanations that have not yet been discredited, such as the feedback theory. I can't say I ascribe any merit to that one, however. He blinked a few times. But don't you just know? Like, the truth? Queg frowned thoughtfully with a combination of high-contrast light notes. He spoke in a tentative manner, not quite understanding. How could anyone simply know, sir? Aaron. Well, you tell me. This is the afterlife, isn't it? I thought the truth would no longer be a matter of speculation. Aaron gave his guide a sidelong look. Are you really saying there's scientific discourse here? What, there's this committee that peer reviews submissions and makes pronouncements? Do arguments break out between crazy tentacle nerds about data-gathering guidelines? He had transitioned from flippant to strident by the end of the sentence. Queg answered without a trace of levity. Oh, nothing like that. These are remerent theories. The pathways are central to our existence, and so we strive to understand them as best we can. There's no pronounced consensus between the different sapient communities, fractured and independent as they are. Okay, sure, awesome. I understand humans have an extensive body of research on these matters, however. Access is restricted, of course. Of course. There's theories now, and scientists, and research. What's next? Money? A job? A friggin' mortgage? The conversation lulled into thoughtful silence as Aaron readjusted his vision of the afterlife yet again. The path down the spiral had narrowed steadily while they talked, but was still wide enough to accommodate an entire football team. The walls on either side were shorter by then, and the view beyond revealed only more paths, platforms, amorphous structures without rhyme or reason. Queg had said that the trip would be short, but for Aaron there was no end in sight. If I may ask, Queg suddenly spoke up, hesitant. You asked about realms earlier, as though they do not exist in the beyond. Is it true that sapiens live on balls of soil floating in empty space? Aaron barked a short laugh and then felt ashamed of it. Probably his every question had sounded just as silly to Queg. His guide didn't seem to mind his lack of finesse. I'm not sure what you mean with sapiens, he responded. That would definitely be his next question. But I can't tell you that humans inhabit a planet called Earth in life. It felt odd, talking as if he was no longer alive. I guess you could say Earth is a ball of soil, he continued. But it's a gross oversimplification. A planet is a spherical body of matter in orbit around a star. A really huge sphere. Enormous. There's tons of them in the universe, but relatively few can support life. Earth is one of them. He went on to explain as best he could water and land, rock and magma. It segued into oxygen, orbits, seasons, tides, and the moon, the heat of the sun, and the relative position of Earth in the solar system. Queg listened intently, openly disbelieving at times, asking brief questions wherever he needed further explanations. Aaron was only happy to oblige, admittedly feeling quite smug about it. It felt nice to be the one imparting knowledge after being stuck with the role of clueless simpleton for so long. It was while explaining the sheer size of the universe that he realized what all these questions meant. Queg found it all quite far-fetched, and some things outright preposterous. He wanted to know all about planets, moons, stars, seasons, day and night. Aaron had a hard time going into detail because the very concepts were completely alien to the creature. He had been so wrapped up explaining everything that the obvious implications hadn't dawned on him until then. He interrupted the lecture and eyed Queg warily. Are you telling me that there's no such thing as day and night anywhere here? I'm afraid I did not even know what to make of those words until you explained. Entirely new concepts sound like a jumble, like when a sapient obfuscates their speech. It is still hard to grasp, but you have been a great help. Aaron took Quegg's response quietly, fully intending to file it in the growing list of incongruities. Don't think about it too much, he told himself. It isn't even the strangest thing so far. Move on to the next question. But he couldn't. The new knowledge dug a hole through his composure and burrowed deep into his psyche, and in its wake came a barrage of brand new, far more disturbing questions. If there were no day and night, no planets, no galaxies, what else was missing? Was there weather? An atmosphere? What exactly was he breathing, if not molecules made up of atoms made in stars? What medium carried words from his face to Quegg's? The questions carried on, challenging everything from the existence of gravity to the composition of his clothes. They hammered a simple truth in his head. All things were different. Not just perception, architecture, customs, or species, but the very structure of the universe, of reality. The fact that he might no longer be made of atoms carved a layer into his thoughts, and this time the resulting migraine was entirely too painful to ignore. He couldn't expect anything to follow real-world logic anymore. Every facet of causality was suspect. Every rule needed to be re-examined. It was time to throw away preconceptions, stop wasting time with disbelief, and simply take what came at face value. If nothing else, it would save him a great deal of frustration. It seemed to help with the crippling pain in his temples, at least. That's what he needed to do. Take things in stride. The talking tentacle monster wanted him to meet the human overlords? Super. The ground beneath his feet could shift and swallow him up at any moment? Fun times. He was actually breathing sublimated chocolate pudding? Awesome. Aaron looked around, realizing he'd completely lost track of his surroundings. He stood in the middle of the path, looking into nothingness, Quegg patiently hovering in front of him. There was concern in its alien features. Sorry about that, Aaron said. I was adjusting. I apologize, Aaron. I did not intend to cause you discomfort. I shouldn't have asked. No, man, it's fine. It's all right. I'm glad you did. I'm good now. We can keep going. Of course. We are almost there. They resumed their way down the clockwise spiral, which had narrowed considerably since Aaron had last bothered to check. The path they'd already traveled sprawled above him by then. He hadn't realized they'd gone so far down. Quegg motioned him toward a break in the outer wall. Aaron approached it, and had to do a double take the moment he saw what lay beyond. The exit turned out to be little more than a gnarled trail, barely wide enough for a sane man to walk on. It dove down in a dangerously steep incline, mitigated only by irregularly spaced steps. There wasn't even a rail to hold onto. It twisted and turned whimsically, supported by a whole lot of nothing all the way to the next platform, which was a long, long way down. The platform it led to was a plateau that sprouted out of a large formation reminiscent of a mountain range, with many more paths leading to it or its immediate vicinity. The sense of depth was mind-boggling. He'd never had problems with heights before, but the view underneath the trail was enough to make his head spin. He could see dozens, hundreds more platforms farther below, and a tangle of paths and bridges interconnecting them in labyrinthine ways. There was no bottom to it. Every feature kept on intertwining until it fell out of sight behind one shape or another. Quegg started on his way down without a hint of hesitation, easily banking this way and that. Aaron watched him for a time, then threw another wary look down the path ahead. Finally he squatted, planted his butt on the uneven surface, and used hands and feet to drag his ass down the slope. Quegg made his version of shaking his head and muttered something about newborns that Aaron didn't quite make out. He could tell the alien was chuckling. Freaking hilarious. Wait till I fall 100 stories and splat on the ground. We'll all laugh then. Grumbling under his breath about floating comedians and how it would be easier if he were a flying octopus himself, he slowly dragged his behind down the treacherous path.